All right, in addition to Don Meredith, there's another senator facing criticism this week, Lynn Beyak. She stood up in the Senate to answer a question and surprised her fellow senators with a speech on the good that was done in residential schools. Here's part of what she had to say.
Well understood.
Obviously, the negative issues must be addressed, but it is unfortunate that they are sometimes magnified and considered more newsworthy than the abundance of good. Mistakes were made at residential schools. In many instances, horrible mistakes that overshadowed some good things that also happened at those schools.
Susan, what do you make of her comments?
Well, they're deeply offensive to survivors of residential schools, obviously. They are outrageous by some accounts, and they don't match the historic record. That being said, even the Truth and Reconciliation Commission acknowledged that in individual cases, there were well-meaning individuals within a system that was inherently racist and often brutal. So that's the context. I don't put her comments, though, in the same category as Don Meredith at all. I think, as I say, they're offensive, and she probably deserves the, the criticism that's raining down on her. But I've always been of the mind that people should be allowed to say what they really think, however it may offend. It's better to know what people are thinking, I think, to have it out in the open where it can be debated, criticized, condemned. So I personally wouldn't be in favor of necessarily kicking her out of the Senate for this, although I certainly understand Murray Sinclair, another senator who's chair of the commission, taking strong issue with her remarks.
Okay, John, what do you think? Do you think at the very least she should be taken off this or leave the Senate Committee on Aboriginal Affairs?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, it's up to the members of the committee, I suppose, to decide who is on the committee, although even that is becoming a vexed question because the party system is breaking down in the Senate. But this is an issue of free speech. The senator is entitled to hold the beliefs that she holds. I think she's wrong. I think the burden of proof rests with her to justify her opinions. I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission pretty much thoroughly rebuts her position. But it's her right to have the beliefs that she has. And frankly, we tend to walk on eggshells when talking about Indigenous issues. There is so much guilt, so much of a sense of responsibility for abuses that have been committed in the past that we sometimes don't ask hard questions about, for example, abuse of spending on reserves and accountability issues and nepotism within reserve governance. All things that we might want to look at but tend not to look at because, again, we don't want to be seen as blaming a victim. But it's probably not unhealthy to have at least one senator in the Senate asking difficult questions, even on that committee. Although, again, on the issue of residential schools, she herself has been disproven by the facts of the commission.
Yeah, Denise, she did bring up examples and cited some what she considered to be credible examples of people who had actually had a good experience in those residential schools.
Well, look, I think the key thing here is what she said was incredibly hurtful to the thousands of Indigenous people that are still reeling from the effects of the residential schools. I was with a group of about 70 young women when her comments first came out, and their reaction was they broke down in tears, and they could not understand and believe that in this day and age we still had senators who were talking about this thing, about residential schools and the impacts, as though it was somehow a good thing. And again, for them, it's the same old story of the colonization. And this is what I think I'm particularly struck by, that it was extremely hurtful and, as Susan mentioned, deeply offensive. Now, in terms of connecting it to what accountability measures on First Nations reserves, these are two completely different issues here. As to whether she ought to resign, again, leave that to the internal mechanisms of the Senate. I certainly think that in terms of her role on the Aboriginal Senate Affairs Committee, that needs to be reevaluated. And I think she's been asked by the chair to step aside. But again, as Susan mentioned, I don't really see this as being in the same category as Senator Don Meredith, but certainly deeply hurtful and offensive to Indigenous communities.
All right, Wednesday. Budget Day. We're going to get to that next on the Sunday Scrum on CBC News Network.